In the ruined heart of ancient Corinth, baked by the relentless Mediterranean sun and buried under millennia of dust, lies a raised stone platform. It is a structure stripped of its former marble glory, yet it still radiates a phantom, suffocating authority. The locals of the first century knew it by a specific, terrifying name. It was not a place of mediation. It was not a table for negotiation or a sanctuary for the broken. It was the elevated tribunal where the Roman magistrate sat in absolute, unquestionable judgment. To be dragged before this stone monolith was to have your life, your actions, and your very fate stripped bare before the crushing machinery of imperial law. There was no defense attorney to twist the truth. There was no court of appeals. There was only the magistrate, the accusation, and the final irreversible verdict. When the Apostle Paul walked the paved streets of Corinth, he watched men tremble before this exact structure. He saw the cold sweat on their brows and the visceral terror in their eyes as they waited for the magistrate to speak. And it was this exact image, this blood-chilling architectural symbol of ultimate reckoning, that Paul chose to describe the final, inevitable destination of every single person who claims to follow the divine. He did not point to a lush garden. He did not describe a grand, joyous banquet table where past sins are laughed away. In his second letter to the Corinthians, chapter 5, verse 10, he wrote a sentence that has been systematically diluted, sanitized, and practically erased from the modern pulpit. For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ. The original text does not use a soft or comforting word for this monumental encounter. Paul deliberately uses the original Greek term for that terrifying Corinthian structure. He weaponized the local, visceral terror of the Roman Bema to convey a spiritual reality so severe that it fractures our modern, comfortable theology. The Bema of Christ is not a gentle review of your life's highlights. It is a divine tribunal, an elevated platform of blinding, absolute justice where the architect of the cosmos demands an accounting of every breath, every hidden motive, and every shadow you thought you had successfully concealed in the dark. We have been lulled into a dangerous, ecclesiastical coma. We have been sold a doctrine of cheap grace that whispers a fatal, comforting lie, that because your soul is secure, your life is exempt from scrutiny. This is the great, suppressed paradox of the ancient texts. Salvation may pull you from the abyss, but it does not shield you from the fire of the Bema. In his first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 3, the text reveals the harrowing mechanics of this celestial tribunal. It speaks of a consuming fire that will test the quality of every man's work. This is not the fire of damnation, but the agonizing, purifying fire of a divine, holy appraisal. Wood, hay, and stubble, the hollow achievements of a self-serving life, the arrogant monuments we build to our own egos, will be incinerated in an instant. The apostle paints a terrifying picture of a believer standing before the creator of the universe, watching their entire life's work turn to ash, escaping with their soul intact, but smelling of smoke. This concept of a meticulous, terrifying accounting was not born in a vacuum. Long before Paul stood in Corinth, the ancient Jewish mystics and prophets understood the gravity of the celestial courtroom. In the apocalyptic visions found in the book of Daniel and expanded upon in the ancient, extra-biblical texts like the book of Enoch, we are shown the terrifying reality of the heavenly ledgers. Books are opened. Every deed, every idle word, every silent malice is recorded with a devastating permanence. The spiritual realm operates on the physics of absolute truth, a cosmic ledger where the geometry of your intentions is measured against the staggering, unyielding holiness of God. There are no shadows to hide in when the omnipresent light of the tribunal exposes the exact anatomy of your hypocrisy. The modern world frantically avoids this reckoning, hiding behind a comfortable, domesticated image of a deity who demands nothing and overlooks everything. But the ancient texts do not flinch, and they do not apologize. They demand that we face the terrifying grandeur of what awaits us in the unseen realm. If you seek the hidden truths of the ancient world, If you are prepared to strip away the comforting illusions of modern tradition and stare into the relentless depths of Scripture, subscribe and join us in this investigation. Because the Bema is not a distant myth or a philosophical metaphor. It is an approaching reality, moving closer with the steady, merciless ticking of a cosmic clock, preparing to weigh the souls of those who mistakenly believed they had already won the trial. We have suffered a collective theological amnesia. In the sterile, fluorescent-lit auditoriums of modern Western religion, the terrifying concept of facing the divine has been systematically reduced to an emotional reunion, a tearful, consequence-free embrace at the gates of a sanitized paradise. The modern intellectual mind has been meticulously trained to view salvation as a final endpoint, a transaction completed at an altar or in a quiet moment of belief, granting a permanent, irrevocable immunity from any future scrutiny. We treat the ancient, blood-soaked cross not as the violent initiation into a lifelong campaign of brutal spiritual warfare, but as a receipt of purchase, a golden ticket that allows us to live with the exact same selfish ambitions, the exact same materialistic greed, and the exact same hidden vices as the secular world, cloaked only in the empty vocabulary of grace. This is a fatal distortion. It is a historical and doctrinal tragedy that has neutered the modern believer, stripping away the holy terror that once drove the early apostles to the very edge of human endurance, martyrdom, and exile. To understand the catastrophic error of this modern interpretation, we must leave the comforting confines of our contemporary worldview and plunge into the harsh, unforgiving, and blood-stained reality of the first-century Mediterranean basin. The ancient world did not operate on the modern principles of democratic equality, safe spaces, or unconditional affirmation. It operated on a strict, unyielding hierarchy of power, patronage, and absolute, crushing authority. When the Apostle Paul wrote his letters to the believers in Corinth, he was addressing a people who lived their entire lives under the dark, heavy shadow of Imperial Rome, a society deeply familiar with the brutal, mechanical efficiency of imperial justice. The city of Corinth itself was a bustling, ruthless metropolis of commerce, maritime trade, and legendary corruption. It had been violently destroyed and later rebuilt by Julius Caesar, governed entirely by the rigid iron of Roman law. And in the very center of its sprawling agora, the public marketplace where the blood of commerce flowed, stood the architectural structure that defined the civic and judicial life of every citizen. The Greeks called it the Bema. The Romans called it the Rostra. We do not need to guess what this structure looked like or rely on theological imagination. Archaeologists have unearthed its massive foundations. It was a looming, rectangular platform, rising high above the cobblestones, faced with gleaming white and blue marble, flanked on either side by waiting areas that functioned less like lobbies and more like holding cells. When the Roman proconsul, a man possessing the delegated godlike authority of the emperor himself, walked up those stone steps and took his seat upon the curule chair, the ivory seat of judgment, the atmosphere of the entire city violently shifted. The chaotic noise of the marketplace fell dead silent. The air grew thick and heavy with the terrifying weight of imminent consequence. To be summoned to the Bema was not to engage in a dialogue. It was not a mediation session. It was to be subjected to the piercing, forensic gaze of the empire. According to the historical records in the book of Acts, chapter 18, Paul himself was physically dragged before this very platform in Corinth, standing bound and bleeding before the proconsul Gallio. He felt the cold marble beneath his bare feet. He saw the magistrate towering above him, silhouetted against the unforgiving Mediterranean sky, holding the absolute power of life and death, the power to grant freedom or to command immediate execution by the sword. It is this precise, terrifying, visceral memory that Paul weaponizes in his second letter to the Corinthians. When he declares to the early church that every single believer must inevitably stand before the Bema of Christ, he is intentionally shattering the illusion of a consequence-free eternity. He is using their deepest civic terror to explain a spiritual absolute. But the terror deepens exponentially when we examine the specific verbs he chooses to deploy in the original Greek manuscript. Our modern English translations offer a sanitized, polite, almost corporate rendering. We must all appear before the judgment seat. The English phrasing suggests simply showing up, a mere attendance requirement in a celestial auditorium. But the ancient Greek word Paul uses is phanerotheini. This is not a word of casual attendance. In the ancient world, phanerotheini meant to be laid completely bare, to be turned inside out, to be made completely manifest without a single shadow, cloak, or crevice to hide behind. It is the violent stripping away of every psychological facade, every religious mask, and every carefully constructed public persona you have curated over a lifetime. It implies an illumination so absolute and so penetrating that the very marrow of your intentions, the microscopic genesis of your thoughts, is exposed to the blinding, unapproachable light of divine scrutiny. You will not merely stand before Christ, you will be unraveled before him. Every whispered conversation behind closed doors, every corrupt financial transaction, every moment of hidden, consuming lust, every silent judgment you harbored against a brother, and every selfish motive that masqueraded as righteous, religious indignation will be projected into the inescapable light of his holiness. The profound tragedy of modern theology is that it has blindly conflated this terrifying appraisal with the final judgment of the damned, creating a massive, confusing amalgamation of eschatological events that dulls the blade of scriptural warning. The average layman assumes there is only one grand assize at the end of time, a massive, mythical scale where good deeds are weighed against bad deeds to determine who enters the pearly gates and who is hurled into the abyss. This is a mythological construct, borrowed more from the ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead and the weighing of the heart against the feather of Ma'at, than from the rigorous, complex architecture of biblical theology. The scriptures demand absolute precision. The judgment that determines the eternal destination of the wicked is an entirely separate, horrifying event, detailed with chilling clarity in the 20th chapter of the Book of Revelation, the Great White Throne. At the Great White Throne, the dead, both great and small, stand before an entity so terrifying, so overwhelmingly absolute in power, that the physical earth and the sky literally fracture and flee from his presence, finding no place to hide. The ledgers of history are opened, and anyone whose name is not found written in the book of life is cast into the lake of fire. That is a judgment of mere existence. That is the final agonizing conclusion of the unredeemed. But the Bema, the judgment seat of Christ, is exclusively reserved for the justified. It is the domestic tribunal of the royal household. Your presence at the Bema means you have already escaped the horrors of the Great White Throne. Your salvation is secure. Your blood-bought right to exist in the eternal city is guaranteed by the agonizing sacrifice of the cross. But modern Christianity stops there, celebrating the threshold as if it were the entire house. Salvation was only the doorway. The Bema is not a trial to determine where you will spend eternity. It is a brutal divine audit to determine how you will spend it, what you will inherit, what level of glory you will possess, and what degree of planetary or cosmic authority you will wield in the coming millennial kingdom. To grasp the paralyzing severity of this audit, we must dig deeper into the historical bedrock of the ancient Near East, into the very concept of what a covenant actually was. The modern democratic mind equates a covenant to a contract, a mutual negotiated agreement between two equal parties who can opt out if the terms become unfavorable. But in the brutal ancient world of the Hittite Empire, the Assyrians and the Israelites, a covenant was a suzerain vassal treaty. It was a blood-bound agreement imposed by a supreme conquering king, the suzerain, upon a subordinate conquered nation or individual, the vassal. The great king offered absolute protection from enemies, provision of resources, and a designated place within his sprawling empire. In exchange, he demanded absolute, unwavering, military-grade loyalty and the exact execution of his specific will on earth. The vassal was essentially an armed steward of the king's resources. God did not establish a democracy with humanity.
He does not ask for our votes on his decrees.
The covenant of grace is a suzerain vassal treaty sealed in the blood of the divine. You have been purchased. You are not your own. Therefore, the Bema is the terrifying, inevitable moment when the High King returns from a long journey, calls his vassals to the elevated platform, and demands a rigorous, mathematical accounting of the capital he entrusted to them. This is not a philosophical metaphor. It is the fundamental, inescapable operating system of the spiritual universe. Look at the direct, unvarnished words of Christ himself. In the parables recorded in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, Jesus repeatedly uses the harsh economic and agricultural framework of the Greco-Roman world to describe the mechanics of the kingdom of heaven. He speaks of a wealthy, powerful master who entrusts his wealth, massive sums known as talents or minas, to his servants and departs to a far country to receive a kingdom. In the historical context of the first century, these servants were not mere laborers working the fields. They were oikonomos, household managers or high-level stewards. A first-century oikonomos was often legally a slave, but a slave entrusted with staggering, almost terrifying power. They managed vast agricultural estates, conducted international maritime trade, and handled immense fortunes on behalf of their absent lord. But this immense privilege came with an equally immense, hovering terror that kept them awake at night. The steward knew that one day, without a single moment of warning, the master would return and issue a terrifying demand. The Greeks had a chilling financial term for this exact moment: logon apodunai. It was the legal demand for a ledger to be surrendered, a merciless forensic audit, where every decimal point, every investment, and every lost coin had to be justified before the executioner's axe fell. If the steward had multiplied the master's wealth, he was elevated from slavery to rule over entire cities. But if he had squandered the resources, if he had buried the treasure in the dirt out of laziness, apathy, or fear, the retribution was swift, violent, and severe. Jesus was not giving practical financial advice to Palestinian farmers. He was unveiling the exact, uncompromising parameters of the Bema. You are the oikonomos of God. Every second of time you breathe, every ounce of physical energy you burn, every intellectual capacity you possess, every dollar that passes through your bank account, and every supernatural spiritual gift you have been granted is not your property. It is the High King's capital, loaned to you for the explicit, singular purpose of expanding his empire in a hostile, demonically controlled territory. At the Bema, the ledgers will be opened to calculate your exact return on investment. This calculation will not be a verbal negotiation. You will not have the opportunity to hire a lawyer or explain your good intentions. It will be an ontological testing by fire. In Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 3, the terrifying mechanics of this audit are explicitly detailed. Paul states that no one can lay any foundation other than Jesus Christ, but then he issues a chilling, ominous warning about how we build upon that secure foundation. He categorizes the building materials of human life into two distinct groups: gold, silver, and precious stones versus wood, hay, and straw. He decrees that the day, the eschatological day of the Lord, will bring everything to light, because it will be revealed with fire, and the fire itself will test the quality, not just the quantity, of each man's work. The modern church completely ignores this fire. We have convinced ourselves through decades of soft teaching that the love of God is exclusively a warm, comforting blanket meant to soothe our anxieties. But the writer of Hebrews in chapter 12 issues a stark, terrifying reminder that we quote only in nervous whispers, "For our God is a consuming fire." The fire at the Bema is the raw, unfiltered, radioactive manifestation of his absolute holiness. It is not a fire designed to torture the soul of the believer, but it is a fire designed to violently incinerate anything and everything that is not perfectly aligned with his eternal, holy will. Imagine the sheer, paralyzing horror of that moment. You step onto the platform. Behind you is a lifetime of earthly accomplishments. Perhaps you built massive, globally recognized corporations. Perhaps you amassed a staggering fortune, achieved unparalleled academic brilliance, or even built a sprawling religious empire, complete with towering megachurches, best-selling theological books, and the deafening adoration of thousands of followers. But if the invisible engine driving those massive achievements was the dark, intoxicating fuel of your own ego, if your secret, unconfessed desire was to make a great name for yourself, rather than to execute the precise will of the suzerain in obscurity, then all of it, every single brick of your legacy, is classified in the celestial registry as nothing more than wood, hay, and stubble. You will stand perfectly still, paralyzed by the majesty of the throne, as the consuming fire of the king's gaze passes over your entire life's work. In a fraction of a second, the monuments you spent 80 agonizing years building will violently combust. They will vaporize into fine ash, blown away by the breath of God. The ancient text is brutal, surgical, and explicit. If the work is burned up, the builder will suffer loss. The Greek word used here by the apostle for suffering loss is zemiothesetai. It does not mean a slight emotional disappointment or a temporary setback. It was a term used in ancient maritime law for a ship that had its entire cargo violently jettisoned into the raging sea to prevent the hull from sinking. It means to be heavily penalized, to be completely impoverished, to suffer catastrophic, irreversible damage to one's eternal estate. Paul writes that this person will indeed be saved, but only as one escaping through the flames of a burning house. They will enter the vastness of eternity, smelling of the smoke of their own wasted, selfish life, arriving in the celestial city as a spiritual pauper, stripped of reward, stripped of their royal inheritance, and stripped of the authority they were meant to wield. This catastrophic loss is not merely about missing out on a cosmic bonus or failing to receive a shiny medal. It fundamentally alters the permanent trajectory of your eternal existence. To truly comprehend this, we must look at the second major cultural metaphor Paul leverages to describe the brutal reality of the Bema, the Isthmian Games. Every 2 years, the ancient world converged just outside the gates of Corinth for a brutal, exhausting, and bloody athletic festival, second only to the Olympics in prestige. The competitors submitted their physical bodies to punishing, agonizing regimes, abstaining from every earthly indulgence, pushing human endurance to the absolute breaking point. For what? Paul asks this exact question in his first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 9. They do it to obtain a corruptible crown. The supreme prize at the Isthmian Games was not a chest of gold or a crown of flawless jewels. It was a Stephanos, a wreath tightly woven from withered celery, wild parsley, or dry pine branches. It was a dead plant placed on the sweaty head of a victor, an emblem of fleeting glory that would turn brown, become brittle, and rot into dust within a week. Yet grown men bled, fractured their bones, and sometimes died in the arena just to possess it for a moment. Paul aggressively contrasts this pathetic, decaying wreath with the imperishable, blinding crown awarded at the Bema. He is screaming across the centuries, trying to violently shake us from our materialistic stupor. The modern believer spends decades exhausting their physical health, sacrificing their marriages, and compromising their morals to build earthly empires, secure suburban comfort, and chase the rotting Stephanos of social status and financial security, completely oblivious to the terrifying fact that they are hemorrhaging the only currency that will actually survive the fire of the Bema. We have fundamentally, catastrophically misunderstood the purpose of our brief, violent time on this earth. This mortal coil is not a waiting room for heaven where we sit comfortably reading magazines until our name is called. It is a proving ground. It is the brutal, unforgiving, high-stakes forge where the future rulers of the age to come are being aggressively tested, refined, and qualified for cosmic authority. The ancient Jewish wedding customs provide yet another harrowing layer to this severe reality. In the ancient Near East, when a betrothal was legally established, the groom would depart to his father's house to physically construct a new dwelling. The bride was left behind. She was already legally bound, already purchased with a heavy price of silver or livestock. but she was required to spend the entire intervening period in rigorous paranoid preparation. She had to keep her garments flawlessly clean, and her lamps full of expensive oil, anticipating a return that would happen at an unknown hour, often in the dead of night, accompanied by the terrifying blast of the shofar. If the groom returned with his entourage and found her garments soiled, her lamps dead, sleeping in apathy, or engaged in the affairs of other men, the wedding feast would not be a celebration. It would be a scene of profound, inescapable shame. The Apostle John, exiled on the penal colony of Patmos, sees the ultimate, cosmic culmination of this ancient tradition in the 19th chapter of Revelation. He sees the bride of Christ making herself ready, clothed in fine linen, bright and pure. But the text adds a terrifying surgical clarification that shatters our modern theology of passive grace. For the fine linen is the righteous deeds of the saints. Your garments for the eternal banquet are physically woven from the thread of your earthly obedience. Those who arrive at the Bema having squandered their time, having lived exclusively for their own appetites and comfort, will find themselves standing naked and profoundly ashamed before the radiant, overwhelming glory of the royal court. This is the great, terrifying deconstruction of our modern religious tradition. We desperately want a Jesus who is a soft therapist, a cosmic life coach, who validates our subjective feelings, excuses our systemic failures, and demands nothing but our mere intellectual acknowledgement of his historical existence. But the Christ who sits upon the Bema is the supreme commander of the armies of heaven. His eyes, as explicitly described by John in Revelation chapter 1, are not soft and inviting. They are like a roaring flame of fire, piercing the darkest dimensions of the human soul. His voice is not a gentle whisper. It is like the deafening roar of many crashing waters. Out of his mouth comes a sharp two-edged sword designed to divide bone from marrow. When John, the beloved disciple, the man who once intimately leaned his head on Jesus' chest at the Last Supper, saw the glorified post-resurrection Christ standing in this terrifying state of absolute authority, he did not run up for a warm embrace. John wrote, "I fell at his feet as though dead." This is the blinding, absolute entity to whom you will give a mathematical account of your life. You will not be able to articulate clever excuses. The intricate psychological defense mechanisms you currently use to justify your spiritual apathy, your moral compromises, and your hidden persistent sins will instantly disintegrate in his presence like paper in a furnace. The darkness you arrogantly thought was successfully covering your secret life is actually fully, vividly illuminated by a God to whom the blackest night is as bright as the midday sun. We have built our massive religious traditions on a soft foundation of theological novocaine, systematically numbing the masses to the absolute, crushing reality of final accountability. We have conveniently forgotten that while justification from hell is an unmerited, free gift purchased by blood, the inheritance of the kingdom, the crowns of authority, and the right to rule are rewards granted exclusively to the obedient, bleeding conqueror who finishes the war. The early church fathers, men like Polycarp and Ignatius, who walked into the Roman Colosseum to be torn apart by wild beasts, or who stood at the executioner's block with unflinching, terrifying resolve, did so because they had this magnificent tribunal locked dead in their crosshairs. They understood that to lose your earthly life for the kingdom was the only logical, economic strategy in a universe entirely governed by the physics of the Bema. But when we dig past the architectural metaphors of the Greeks and the legal treaties of the ancient Near East, we hit a deeper, far more terrifying layer of ancient text. We leave the realm of human history and enter the realm of the celestial watchers, the supernatural geometric architecture of the heavenly realms, and the terrifying mechanics of how these heavenly ledgers are actually maintained. Because you are not just being watched by an omnipresent God. You are being actively observed, recorded, and meticulously documented by an ancient, invisible hierarchy of entities whose sole, terrifying purpose is to witness the actions of humanity. The Book of Enoch, the visions of Daniel, and the fragmented scrolls found hidden in the caves of Qumran pull back the veil on a multi-dimensional surveillance apparatus so vast, so bizarre, and so flawlessly rigorous that it completely shatters the fragile boundaries of human comprehension. When the modern secularized mind imagines privacy, it constructs a fortress of solitude out of locked doors, encrypted digital files, and the silent, impenetrable vault of the human skull. We operate under the arrogant, fundamental delusion that when we retreat into the darkest corners of our homes, pull the curtains and extinguish the lights, we are finally alone. We believe that the thoughts we never vocalize, the secret resentments we harbor against our brothers, and the silent lusts we entertain in the theater of our minds are our exclusive property, lost to the void of time the moment they pass. But the ancient apocalyptic texts of the biblical canon obliterate this comforting illusion with terrifying precision. They reveal a spiritual ecosystem defined not by privacy, but by a suffocating, inescapable state of absolute surveillance. The early church did not believe in a distant clockmaker God who wound up the universe and walked away to let it run its course. They understood that the atmosphere around them was thick with a highly structured, fiercely intelligent hierarchy of celestial entities whose primary, terrifying function was observation and recording. To understand the sheer magnitude of the Bema, we must first understand the staggering volume of data that this celestial tribunal processes. In the 4th chapter of the ancient book of Daniel, the prophet is exposed to the terrifying reality of the divine council, receiving a vision that fundamentally alters our understanding of angelic mechanics. The text does not speak of cherubim with soft wings or gentle guardians standing passively by the bedsides of children. The ancient Aramaic manuscript introduces a specific horrifying class of celestial beings designated by the root word ear. This is not a messenger. An ear is a watcher, a supernatural sentinel defined entirely by its perpetual, unblinking state of wakefulness. These are entities devoid of the biological necessity of sleep, operating outside the sluggish constraints of human time, positioned as silent, invisible sentinels over the sprawling empires of men and the intimate, microscopic details of individual lives. Their gaze is penetrating, surgical, and absolutely merciless, capturing the raw, unfiltered reality of human behavior without the distorting lens of human rationalization. This concept of unyielding surveillance was not an isolated prophetic anomaly. It was the terrifying bedrock of ancient Jewish cosmology. In the desolate, sun-scorched caves of Qumran, the ascetic scribes who meticulously copied and preserved the Dead Sea Scrolls lived their entire lives under the crushing psychological weight of this reality. Within their sectarian documents, specifically the community rule and the fragmented texts of the Book of Jubilees, they detailed a highly mechanized system of heavenly accounting. They did not view the recording of deeds as an abstract poetic metaphor. They believed in a literal daily protocol where, at the exact moment the sun dipped below the horizon, and again at the violent breaking of the dawn, the angelic watchers ascended to the highest heaven to submit their forensic reports to the celestial court. Every whisper of rebellion, every stolen coin, every fractured vow, and every arrogant thought generated within the desert camp was transferred into the permanent, unalterable ledgers of eternity. The universe, according to the ancient mystics, is not a dead, empty vacuum of space and rock. It is a massive, living, breathing acoustic chamber that absorbs and permanently records every vibration of human existence. Christ himself validated the terrifying exactness of this cosmic surveillance apparatus in the 12th chapter of the Gospel of Matthew, delivering a metric of judgment so impossibly strict that it paralyzes the modern theological mind. He stated with absolute cold authority that on the day of judgment, men will render an account for every careless word they have ever spoken. The modern pulpit desperately tries to soften this blow, claiming Jesus was employing hyperbole or simply warning against severe profanity. But the original Greek vocabulary employed by the gospel writer offers no such comfort. The word used to describe these condemned words is argon. It does not inherently mean a vicious, blasphemous, or openly demonic utterance. Argon translates literally to idle, inactive, barren, or useless. It is the frivolous chatter we use to tear others down. It is the sarcastic, biting comment disguised as a joke. It is the hollow, empty promise made to a brother in need, and the thousands of meaningless syllables we vomit into the atmosphere simply to fill the silence, devoid of any spiritual fruit, truth, or edification. According to the architecture of the Bema, the physics of sound do not cease when the vibration leaves the human ear. The audio of your entire life is captured, preserved, and destined to be played back in the blinding light of the celestial tribunal. Every argon word you have spoken in the dark will be mathematically weighed against the holy standard of a God who spoke the very fabric of reality into existence with absolute, terrifying intention. If the gathering of this data is this granular, this microscopic in its terrifying exactness, the physical and spiritual location where this data is processed defies human imagination. The modern Christian visualizes the judgment seat of Christ as a quiet, intimate office where Jesus sits across a wooden desk, reviewing a file folder. This pathetic, domesticated imagery is an insult to the biblical text. The true nature of the celestial courtroom is a theater of sensory overload, a violent collision of dimensions that shatters the mortal mind. When the prophet Daniel saw the thrones being set in place in the 7th chapter of his ancient scroll, he did not see a serene courtroom. He witnessed an eruption of pure, unadulterated spiritual power. The throne of the Ancient of Days was engulfed in a roaring, consuming flame, its very wheels radiating the heat of a burning furnace. And issuing forth from the base of this throne was not a peaceful stream of water, but a terrifying, rushing river of solid fire. The ancient rabbis and mystics who studied this text extensively called this the din, the physical manifestation of God's absolute, terrifying justice. This river of fire is not the lake of fire destined for the damned. It is the ontological outflow of God's holiness, a purifying, destructive force that annihilates anything false, anything hypocritical, and anything born of the human ego. When the Apostle Paul warned the Corinthians that every man's work would be tested by fire, he was directly tapping into this ancient, apocalyptic vision of the fiery stream of Daniel. To stand at the Bema is to stand on the banks of this roaring metaphysical river. You are forced to take the entirety of your life, every sermon you preached, every check you wrote to charity, every hour you spent in prayer, every business you built, and every sacrifice you thought was noble, and cast it directly into this raging torrent of divine flame. Only the materials forged in the pure, selfless obedience to the will of the High King will survive the temperature of absolute truth. Everything else, the massive, towering cathedrals of human pride we spend decades constructing, will instantly vaporize into fine white ash. The sheer, crushing scale of this event is mathematically incomprehensible. Daniel records that 1,000 thousands ministered to the Ancient of Days, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. This is not a vague, poetic description of a large crowd. In the ancient numerical systems, this represents an incalculable, sprawling sea of celestial entities, myriads upon myriads of watchers, seraphim, cherubim, and the terrifying multi-eyed Ophanim described by the prophet Ezekiel in his visions of the Merkabah, the divine chariot. You will not stand at the Bema in private. The modern obsession with personal, private spirituality ends violently at the grave. Your audit will be conducted in the presence of the entire assembled architecture of the heavenly host. The principalities and powers of the unseen realm, the ancient intelligences who have observed human history since the dawn of the Genesis creation, will stand as silent, terrifying witnesses to the exact geometry of your life. There is a profound, horrifying difference between the frail, decaying mechanism of human memory and the flawless, eternal state of divine memory. When we reflect on our past sins, our betrayals, and our secret hypocrisies, time mercifully dilutes the sting. We construct elaborate psychological narratives to justify why we lied, why we stole, why we abandoned our posts, and why we compromised our integrity. We convince ourselves that our motives were complex, that the circumstances forced our hand, and over the decades, the sharp edges of our guilt are sanded down into a dull, manageable ache. We become the heroes of our own heavily edited historical fiction. But the Bema does not operate within the linear flow of human time. God does not remember your actions the way a man remembers a faded photograph. In the eternal present of the divine mind, every action you have ever taken is actively occurring. When the books are opened, as described in the apocalyptic visions, you are not reading a dry transcript of past events. You are forced to relive the exact unfiltered reality of your actions, stripped of all self-deception, standing naked under the crushing, omnipresent gaze of a perfectly holy creator. The terror of the Bema is the terror of ultimate, inescapable exposure. It is the violent shattering of the mirror we use to admire our own perceived righteousness. Consider the staggering implications of the ancient Greek text in the letter to the Hebrews, which declares that all things are naked and opened unto the eyes of him with whom we have to do. The word translated as opened is etrakalismena, a brutal, visceral term derived from the ancient arenas and slaughterhouses. It describes a wrestler who has gripped his opponent by the throat, violently pulling the head back to expose the jugular, or the sacrificial animal whose neck is forcibly laid bare before the blade of the priest. It is a state of absolute paralyzing vulnerability where resistance is physically impossible and evasion is a mathematical absurdity. You cannot turn your face away from the light of the Bema. You cannot look down. Your soul is gripped by the throat and forced to stare directly into the blazing, unapproachable light of absolute truth, while the meticulous mathematical inventory of your existence is read aloud. This is the great, suppressed secret of the early Christian martyrs. They did not fear the Roman sword. They did not fear the agonizing teeth of the lions in the amphitheater. And they did not fear the suffocating darkness of the Mamertine prison, because their psychological terror was entirely reserved for the Bema. They understood that the brief, agonizing pain of physical martyrdom was a mathematically insignificant price to pay to avoid the eternal, catastrophic shame of standing before the Supreme Commander with a squandered life. They knew that the ancient, invisible ledgers were constantly being updated. They lived with the terrifying, beautiful hyper-awareness that the invisible dimension was intimately layered over the physical dimension, that the veil separating the marketplace from the throne room of God was thinner than a breath. Yet, we have constructed a modern, insulated theological system designed specifically to deafen our ears to the scratching of the celestial scribe's quills. We gorge ourselves on the endless, numbing entertainment of the digital age. We obsess over the accumulation of decaying material wealth, and we engage in bitter, petty tribal warfare over political and social illusions, utterly blind to the fact that the architecture of our eternal existence is being forged in real time. We are building our houses on the absolute edge of a roaring volcano, convinced that the smoke rising from the crater is just a change in the weather. The ancient texts do not offer a compromise. They do not present a middle ground where the lukewarm, apathetic believer can safely hide in the shadows of eternity. The Bema is an absolute binary. It will either be the moment of supreme, unimaginable coronation, where the battered, bleeding, and obedient warrior receives the imperishable crown of authority, or it will be a moment of catastrophic, eternal loss, a devastating unmasking that will leave the soul smelling of smoke, stripped of its inheritance and permanently marked by the agony of what could have been. This terrifying precision of the divine audit creates a theological crisis that the modern church is utterly ill-equipped to handle. We have spent centuries preaching a gospel of effortless acquisition, promising the masses that the blood of the cross acts as a permanent blindfold over the eyes of God, preventing him from seeing our daily, persistent betrayals. But the staggering reality of the Bema forces a violent collision between the doctrine of unmerited grace and the absolute necessity of rigorous, agonizing human obedience. If salvation is a free gift, impossible to earn through the filthy rags of human righteousness? Why does the entire unseen realm meticulously calculate the exact weight, quality, and purity of our earthly works? This is not a contradiction. It is a profound, terrifying paradox that the early fathers wrestled with in the dark. It is the realization that the grace that pulls you from the abyss of the great white throne is the exact same grace that demands the absolute, total annihilation of your autonomy, thrusting you into a theater of war where every micro-decision carries the crushing weight of eternal consequence. We have arrived at the precipice of the most dangerous, suppressed doctrine in the entire corpus of Christian antiquity. To speak of the Bema is to navigate a field of theological landmines that the early church, and later the institutionalized powers of the medieval era, worked feverishly to disarm. The paradox that haunts this investigation is this: how can a theology of absolute forensic accountability coexist with a theology of sovereign, unmerited grace? The modern mind seeks to resolve this tension by abandoning one to preserve the other. We either embrace a reckless, antinomian hypergrace that treats the cross as a license to remain unchanged, or we fall into the crushing legalistic insanity of a works-based salvation that demands we purchase our own redemption through an endless, impossible cycle of moral performance. Both paths are fatal. Both paths are lies designed to shield the human soul from the terrifying reality of the Bema. The early church understood, with a clarity we have long ago traded for comfort, that the cross was not the end of the war, it was the enlistment. The tragedy of modern religious life is the transformation of the New Testament into a manual for emotional management and life success, rather than a manifesto for an invading kingdom. We have interpreted the profound, terrifying metaphors of the apostles as mere figures of speech, stripping them of their real-world martial and economic force. When Paul speaks of the believer as a soldier of Christ who must not become entangled in the civilian affairs of this world, we treat it as a quaint, poetic exhortation. We fail to recognize that in the first century, a soldier of the Roman legions was not an employee. He was a literal legal extension of the state's power, subject to the absolute life-ending authority of his commander, and legally barred from property, trade, or personal business. The stakes of that soldier's life were absolute. Failure meant execution. Desertion meant death. This is the hidden, dark core of the apostolic mission that the institution of the church spent centuries burying beneath layers of ritual and moralism. They suppressed the terrifying truth that we are not here to be happy or to fulfill our potential. We are here as an occupying force in a world currently held in the iron grip of a demonic usurper. Every breath we draw in this hostile territory is being logged by the celestial watchers. Every move we make, every secret alliance we form, and every compromise we accept for the sake of our own social standing is being recorded in the books that will be opened at the Bema. The reason this doctrine was systematically sidelined is simple. It is an intolerable, paralyzing reality for anyone who desires to live a life of compromise, comfort, or worldly ambition. It strips away the luxury of apathy. It demands a level of spiritual discipline that the modern human, addicted to the constant numbing stimulation of the digital age, is physically and mentally incapable of sustaining. We must confront the paradox of the saved but suffering builder. The Apostle Paul does not mince words in his letter to the Corinthians. He explicitly describes a scenario where a person stands before the tribunal, witnesses their entire life's work disintegrate into worthless ash, and suffers a loss that leaves them as a spiritual pauper for the duration of eternity. This is not a metaphor for a bad day. This is an ontological bankruptcy. It suggests that there is a hierarchy of reward and a spectrum of glory in the age to come that is directly tied to the level of agonizing, self-sacrificial obedience in this present life. The early mystics spoke of degrees of light, a concept that defies our modern, egalitarian sensibilities. They suggested that the capacity to contain the glory of God in the eternal state is determined by the vessel we construct through our trials, our suffering, and our absolute, unyielding adherence to the King's commands here on earth. A life of comfort, a life of evasion, a life of playing it safe creates a vessel too small, too brittle, and too corrupted to endure the sheer, overwhelming, radiant majesty of the throne. The limitation of our human understanding is the primary weapon the adversary uses to keep us in this state of lukewarm apathy. We cannot fathom that the king would demand such a terrifying forensic accounting of a life that he himself has already redeemed. We demand that God act according to our infantile sense of fairness. We want a divine Father who is essentially a celestial coddler, one who ignores our failures because he knows our hearts. But the scriptures present a God who is a consuming fire, a being whose nature is so perfectly, absolutely holy that he cannot be in the presence of anything that is not perfectly refined. The Bema is not a trial to see if you are good enough to enter the kingdom. It is a furnace designed to burn away everything that is not Christ. If your life is entirely built on your own agenda, if your focus has been on your own reputation, your own wealth, your own stability, and your own subjective happiness, then there is nothing left at the end but the smoke of your own wasted existence. This leads us to the most dangerous, neglected aspect of the spiritual war, the role of the celestial witnesses. The Apostle Paul, in his letter to the Ephesians, describes our lives as a spectacle to the principalities and powers in the heavenly places. This is not a gentle, encouraging audience cheering us on from the sidelines. The word used for spectacle is theatron. It describes an arena of public exhibition, often associated with the brutal Roman spectacle of the gladiators. We are the combatants in an arena where the audience is composed of ancient, highly intelligent, and fiercely antagonistic spiritual entities who are constantly documenting our weaknesses, our compromises, and our failures to use as legal evidence in the high court of the heavens. They are the prosecutors at the Bema. When we sin, we are not just failing a moral standard, we are handing ammunition to the enemy. We are creating wood, hay, and stubble that will be used to humiliate us before the entire assembly of the heavenly host when our time at the Bema finally arrives. The Church in the West has become an architect of its own destruction by embracing a theology that denies the reality of this battle. We have taught the people that because the war was won on the cross, they can lay down their armor, leave their post, and spend their time in the taverns of this world. We have created a generation of believers who are spiritually emaciated, entirely unprepared for the sheer intensity of the celestial audit. We talk about the love of God as if it were a soft, domestic, unconditional approval, rather than the terrifying, aggressive, and exclusive passion of a king who demands total, uncompromising conquest of the territory he has reclaimed. We have confused the patience of God with the absence of judgment. We have mistaken the delay of the final reckoning for the non-existence of the tribunal. But the Bema is not a future event. It is a future reality that is exerting a constant, gravitational pull on our present lives. The decisions you make tonight, the silent compromises you accept in your business, the secret pride you nurse in your intellectual achievements, are already being encoded into the record. The paradox is that while the blood of the cross is sufficient for your salvation, it is not a buffer against the refining fire of the tribunal. You will stand there. You will be stripped bare. You will watch your works be tested. And the quality of your inheritance, the degree of your authority, and the nature of your eternal existence will be determined by the brutal, honest, and terrifying inventory of the life you are living right now. The limitation is not in God's ability to forgive. The limitation is in our inability to realize the absolute, terrifying, and irrevocable importance of this brief, violent window of time we have been granted to serve as stewards of the High King's empire. The fire is coming, and it will not ask for your opinion on how you would like to be judged. It will simply test what you have built. The implications of this audit extend far beyond the narrow, individualistic confines of our own eternal destiny. We have been conditioned to view our lives as isolated biographies, unrelated to the grand, sweeping arc of cosmic history. But the ancient texts teach that the Bema is the intersection where the personal and the prophetic collide. We are living in the final volatile chapters of a cosmic conflict that began long before the foundations of the earth were laid. The outcome of your life, the weight of your obedience or the magnitude of your waste, is a foundational brick in the construction of the age to come. The prophecy of the millennial kingdom, described with haunting detail in the 20th chapter of Revelation, is not a vague, ethereal state of bliss. It is a literal, earthly reign where the saints are tasked with the administration, governance, and restoration of a planet that has been ravaged by millennia of rebellion and demonic occupation. The terrifying reality we must face is that the Bema is the qualification exam for this future planetary government. You are being trained to rule. The hardships, the failures, and the brutal, often senseless trials you encounter in this life are the curriculum of the Supreme Commander, designed to refine your character, purge your ego, and forge in you the unbreakable iron of a true sovereign steward. If you fail to endure, if you constantly retreat into the comforts of the world, if you choose the soft, rotting crown of social status over the cold, hard discipline of the cross, you are not just losing a future bonus. You are disqualifying yourself from the governance of the coming age. You are proving yourself unfit to hold the authority that the king intends to delegate to his most faithful, most hardened veterans. Consider the prophetic weight of this investigation. The current state of our world, the surging darkness, the breakdown of truth, the aggressive expansion of the occult, and the silent, terrifying march toward an eschatological crisis, is not an accident. It is the intensification of the war. We are the stewards tasked with guarding the territory against an enemy that is no longer hiding in the shadows. Yet, look at the state of the ranks. The church is fragmented, distracted, and obsessed with the trivialities of the present moment. We are watching the horizon for signs of the end, yet we are utterly failing to do the one thing required: to stand at our posts and maintain the integrity of our stewardship. The Bema is the point of convergence where the hidden war becomes a public demonstration. Every martyr who gave their life in the Roman arena, every saint who endured the furnace of isolation in the deserts of Egypt, and every faithful worker who served the king in obscurity and poverty will have their service publicly, agonizingly vindicated before the gaze of the principalities and powers. The prophecy of the final days is a prophecy of a great, global, and devastating sifting. The world will be forced into a binary of absolute allegiance. The lukewarm will be vomited out, not into the abyss of the damned, but into a state of profound, eternal irrelevance and shame, having missed the opportunity to act as kings and priests in the kingdom of God. The present reality is a crucible. The technological, economic, and geopolitical upheaval we see daily is the shaking of the foundations, the beginning of the labor pains of a new creation. It is the environment in which your work is being tested. Are you building with the gold and silver of the kingdom, or are you constructing monuments to your own fleeting mortal relevance? The Bema is the absolute unyielding threshold that dictates the future of the human race. It is the final terrifying barrier between the survival of the soul and the success of the mission. We are living in the shadow of the Tribunal. Every action we take is currently being weighed against the requirements of the coming king. The time for apathy is over. The time for the refined, brutal, and uncompromising pursuit of the king's will is now, for the ledger is open, and the fire is already moving toward us. The architecture of the universe is not designed for your comfort, your happiness, or the validation of your earthly identity. We have spent our lives constructing a fragile, illusionary reality based on the dangerous assumption that the Creator is primarily concerned with our subjective well-being. We have treated the Holy of Holies as a therapy session, and the fire of God as a metaphor for divine warmth. We are wrong. The ancient texts, the historical reality of the first-century apostolic mission, and the terrifying forensic precision of the celestial witness all point to a singular, unavoidable conclusion. God is not a passenger in your life. He is the judge, the architect, and the ultimate, absolute end of all things. When we strip away the sanitized veneer of modern tradition, we are left with a reality of haunting severity. The Bema is not a distant, theoretical event occurring at the end of some mythological timeline. It is the inescapable trajectory of your existence. You are currently in the theater, the arena of the unseen, under the constant surgical surveillance of entities who do not sleep, do not negotiate, and do not forget. Every decision you make, every idle word you utter, and every hidden motive you nurture is being recorded with a permanence that defies the decay of the material world. You are not building for today. You are building the very fabric of your eternal state, brick by agonizing brick, under the blinding, intrusive light of a God who is a consuming fire. There is no middle ground in the architecture of the divine court. There is no quiet corner of the celestial city where the apathetic, the worldly, and the compromised can find a comfortable, shaded place to rest. To have arrived at the tribunal having lived a life of self-service, having prioritized the rotting crowns of human relevance over the iron-forged authority of the kingdom, is to face an eternal consequence that is as severe as it is irreversible. To smell of smoke, to stand in the presence of the king as a pauper of your own making, to witness the absolute vaporization of your life's work. This is the terror that the apostles lived with, the terror that turned cowards into martyrs, and the terror that we have systematically erased from our consciousness to maintain the illusion of our own righteousness. We are small, temporary, and utterly fragile. We are walking shadows in a vast, ancient, and terrifyingly complex spiritual ecosystem. The history of the world is a record of civilizations that thought they were eternal, only to be reduced to dust and silence by the steady, unrelenting movement of the divine will. Your life is no different. It is a vapor, a flash of lightning in the eternal night. But in that brief, violent flash, you are presented with the only choice that possesses absolute ontological weight. Will you continue to build your own monument, or will you submit to the fire that is coming? The Bema is not a debate. It is not an inquiry. It is a reckoning. And it is, by every definition of the word, inescapable. The books are open, the ledger is being filled, and the fire, in its absolute unyielding holiness, is already moving toward the platform. You will stand there. The only question that will remain is what will be left of you when the light finally clears.